During our family dinner, she mocked my stutter for everyone to see. I smiled through it, but she sneered. Look at him, struggling like a broken machine. Hey, welcome back to the story. I'm so glad you're here. Are you settled in and ready for today's journey? Today, we're stepping into the shoes of a character who's facing a massive turning point in their life. It's one of those moments where you're forced to make decisions that can change everything, decisions that can feel impossible but also necessary. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you had no choice but to take control of your own life, no matter how hard it was? Stick around to see how the character deals with it. I hope this story hits home and maybe even inspires you. If you're enjoying this content, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button so we can keep the story journey going together. Thanks so much for being here. The city lights of downtown Chicago twinkled brightly as the night sky cast a calm over the holiday festivities. The aroma of roasted turkey and freshly baked pies filled the air inside the luxurious restaurant that Anna had chosen for their family's Thanksgiving dinner. It was supposed to be a special occasion, one to celebrate family and togetherness. However, for Ethan, it quickly became the turning point in his marriage. Ethan, a quiet, thoughtful man in his late 30s, had always been self-conscious about his speech impediment. His stutter, while manageable for most of his life, flared up in moments of stress. Tonight, however, it was especially bad. He could feel his pulse quicken as he tried to explain his plans for the upcoming year. He spoke of their trip to Colorado, a dream vacation they had been saving up for, but his words stumbled and caught in his throat. Then, something unexpected happened. Sitting across from him, his wife, Jessica, suddenly leaned in with a mocking grin. She exaggerated his stutter, mimicking him for the entire table to hear. Maybe if we turn him off and on again, he'll finally be able to speak like a normal person, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Her family, sitting around the table, burst into laughter. Ethan's face turned pale as Jessica's father, James, gave her a high five. His mother, Rachel, fidgeted nervously, but said nothing. Ethan's heart sank. He tried to smile, pretending to laugh it off, but inside, everything was breaking apart. The love and respect he once felt for his wife had slowly turned into something ugly. He couldn't understand how she could be so cruel, not just in private, but in front of her family. After the dinner, the drive home was silent. Jessica was glued to her phone, laughing at something on the screen, while Ethan stewed in his own thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with their marriage, but he had no idea how deep the betrayal went. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that greeted Ethan as he entered his apartment the morning after the disastrous dinner. The apartment felt colder than usual, the quiet hum of life outside barely making its way through the thick walls. He had left Jessica's apartment late last night, feeling more like a stranger in his own home than a husband. The taste of her laughter still lingered in his mind, a cruel reminder of what had unfolded the night before. For weeks, Ethan had noticed the subtle shifts in Jessica's behavior. She'd become more distant, more distracted, often staring at her phone during their conversations, avoiding his gaze whenever they spoke. But the signs were easy to dismiss. He had tried to chalk it up to the holiday season, stress, the pressure of family obligations, the pressure of everything. But last night, after the dinner, something felt irrevocably different. Something had cracked, and now, standing in his apartment, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something monumental. As he sank into the couch, the quiet of the apartment pressing down on him, his mind wandered back to that moment at the dinner table. The way Jessica had mocked him, the way her father and mother had laughed. Even as he smiled through it, something in his gut had twisted. He had convinced himself it was a momentary lapse, a bad joke, a thoughtless comment. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. He knew it was something much darker. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a soft, buzzing sound. Jessica's phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was vibrating steadily. He hadn't meant to snoop. The thought hadn't even crossed his mind. But the buzz was relentless, the screen lighting up with a flood of notifications. His curiosity gnawed at him, the heavy weight of something he couldn't ignore pushing him forward. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering above the phone. It wasn't that he didn't trust her. Well, that's what he had convinced himself, anyway. But something in him had shifted overnight. Something was off, and the nagging sense of doubt was becoming harder to ignore. He knew the passcode he always had. It was the same one she'd used for years. And in that moment, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to unlock it. The first notification that popped up made his stomach drop. OMG. That video of Ethan stuttering at dinner was hilarious. Your dad's reaction killed me. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been laughing through the night, smiling through the humiliation, pretending like it didn't bother him. But now, reading these words, this casual cruelty, he felt exposed, laid bare in ways he couldn't explain. He had thought that the mocking had stopped at the table, but it didn't. It never stopped. His heart pounded as his fingers scrolled down the screen. There were more messages, lots of them, one after another, each one like a dagger in his chest. Hubby.exe has stopped working. Read one caption under a video of him struggling to speak. Buffering. Another said, accompanied by a clip of him attempting to form words, his face contorting with effort. Each message more dehumanizing than the last, as if the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, had been documenting every flaw, every stutter, every vulnerability he had. The next few messages sent a chill through his veins. They weren't just from Jessica. They were from her father, James. Why do you even put up with him? He's such a mess. One of the messages read. His heart sank as he read through more, each one mocking him for something he could never control. Jessica's mother, Rachel, had been silent throughout the dinner. But in these messages, she was silent too, complicit in the ridicule, doing nothing to stop it. Ethan stood frozen, his hands still gripping the phone. The air in the apartment seemed to grow thicker with every word he read. It was one thing to be mocked in private, but to have it recorded, shared, and laughed at by her family and friends. It was a betrayal that went far beyond anything he could have imagined. This was no longer a joke. It was something darker, something much worse than he had anticipated. He continued scrolling, his eyes scanning the screen in disbelief. There were more videos of him trying to speak at different times over the past few months. Each one came with cruel captions, each one showing him at his weakest, at his most vulnerable. It wasn't just a couple of isolated incidents. It was months of ridicule, months of her laughing at him behind his back, sharing these videos like they were nothing more than an amusing sideshow. His hands shook as he reached the final message. One from Jessica to her friend, casually asking, "Do you want to see another one of his meltdowns from last week? It's too good. I almost feel bad for him." Ethan's blood ran cold as he felt his stomach churn, the weight of the betrayal settling on his chest. This wasn't just about him stuttering. It was about Jessica using his vulnerability as entertainment, as a tool to make herself feel superior. He sat there, motionless, staring at the phone in his hands, the weight of everything crashing down on him. His mind raced, the thoughts chaotic and jumbled. How had he not seen this before? Had she always been like this? How had he allowed himself to be treated this way for so long? The answers didn't come. All he could feel was the gnawing emptiness, the realization that the woman he had loved and trusted was not the person he thought she was. The sound of the shower water running seemed distant now, almost muffled, as if he were no longer in the same room. His heart pounded in his ears as he processed everything. Her cruelty, her deception, her utter lack of empathy. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But this moment, this discovery, was the turning point. Ethan wasn't just a passive victim anymore. He wasn't going to sit idly by while his life crumbled around him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he realized that he had the power to take control. He could leave. He could escape this toxic relationship. But he would do it on his own terms, in his own way. No longer would he let Jessica define his worth. No longer would he allow her to mock him, to make him feel small, to use his vulnerability as a source of amusement for herself and her family. He had been more than patient, more than understanding, but this betrayal was where he drew the line. Ethan set the phone down slowly, the weight of the decision settling in his chest. He wasn't going to confront Jessica immediately. No, he needed time to think, to plan, to prepare. He wasn't going to let her see the depth of his hurt. Not yet. He would leave when it was the right time, when he had everything in place. But as the shower turned off and Jessica emerged from the bathroom, oblivious to the storm that had just been unleashed, Ethan knew that everything had changed. The person he thought he knew, the woman he had married, was gone, and he was ready to take the first steps toward reclaiming his life. Hey, are you finding the story interesting so far? If you are, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can continue the adventure together. The best part is just ahead. The next few weeks dragged by slowly for Ethan, each day feeling like a quiet battle, fought behind the walls of his own mind. He had spent years building a life with Jessica, a life that had once been filled with laughter and dreams. But now it was all breaking apart piece by piece. The discovery of her betrayal had shattered his trust in her. And now, in the silence of his apartment, he was left with only one goal: to escape. Ethan knew this wasn't going to be easy. He had to act carefully, methodically, without arousing any suspicion. For the first time in his life, he felt like a stranger in his own marriage. The woman he had married, the one he had trusted, was not the person she had seemed to be. The cruelty, the mocking, the way she had belittled him, it was all so overwhelming. He had to get out. He had no choice. As he sat at his desk, he began the meticulous process of planning his departure. He opened his laptop, staring at the blank screen before him. It felt surreal, like he was playing a role in a movie he never wanted to be a part of. But the reality of it hit him hard every time he looked at the screen, every time he realized how far this had all gone. The financial setup. Ethan began by gathering every financial document he could find. Credit card statements, bank account details, bills, everything was fair game. He knew he needed to create a paper trail, something that would allow him to move out without raising Jessica's suspicions. He didn't want her to catch wind of his plan until it was too late. Opening a new bank account was step one. He found a bank that offered online-only services, one that wouldn't require him to physically go to a branch and risk being seen. Under a fake name, one he had carefully chosen, he opened the account. He transferred small amounts of money, nothing that would raise alarms, but just enough to give him the financial freedom he needed. Over the next few weeks, he made careful transfers, always staying just under the radar. Each time he made a move, he felt a brief rush of anxiety, followed by relief. The process was slow, methodical, but it was working. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. If Jessica found out, everything would be ruined. The storage unit and hidden moves. The next step was renting a storage unit. Ethan knew he couldn't move all of his belongings at once, especially since he lived in the same apartment as Jessica. So he found a small, nondescript unit in a warehouse district, far enough away from their neighborhood to be safe. Each weekend, when Jessica was out with her friends or running errands, Ethan would quietly gather his most valuable possessions: his laptop, a few pieces of clothing, some sentimental items, and transport them to the storage unit. He was careful to avoid leaving any traces. He didn't want to accidentally leave a pair of shoes or a jacket behind. Every item he took had to be accounted for. In the evenings, after Jessica had gone to bed, he would sit at the kitchen table, staring at his bank account screen, double-checking that everything was in order. There was always a nagging voice in the back of his mind, reminding him that things could go wrong at any moment. But he kept going, pushing the doubts aside. He was too far in now to turn back. The apartment search. Ethan's search for an apartment near his office was another key piece of the plan. He knew that once he left, he couldn't go back to their current home. It was too much of a reminder of what had been, of the false pretenses, the lies. He needed a fresh start, somewhere he could breathe again. He found a modest one-bedroom apartment in a quiet building a few blocks from his office. It wasn't much, but it would be his refuge. It wasn't luxurious, but it would be his escape from the nightmare that had become his marriage. Every time he visited the apartment for a walkthrough, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. It was an oasis in the chaos, a place where he could rebuild himself. But finding the apartment was just the beginning. Ethan had to make sure that everything was set in place before he could make the move. The first few days after securing the apartment were filled with tension. He would visit after work, bringing a few boxes and bags, storing them carefully in the closet, out of sight from Jessica's prying eyes, maintaining the facade. Throughout all of this, Ethan kept up the appearance of a loving, devoted husband. He played the part with an effort that drained him. He smiled when Jessica talked about their future. He acted as though everything was fine when her family called. He did everything he could to maintain the illusion that everything was perfect, while secretly planning his escape. It wasn't easy. He had to swallow his frustration every time Jessica mentioned future vacations, home renovations, or their plans to buy a house. It felt like a knife in his chest every time she talked about their dreams together, knowing full well that everything he had worked for, everything he had invested in this relationship, was about to crumble. He pretended to be interested in her daily life, her work, her thoughts. He listened when she complained about her coworkers or talked about the new yoga class she had started. He nodded at the right moments, smiled at her jokes, and laughed when appropriate. But inside he was screaming. Every word felt like a lie, every smile like a betrayal of what he was planning to do. Nights on the couch. Every night, as he lay on the couch, pretending to nurse a back injury, Ethan's mind raced. The anxiety gnawed at him relentlessly. His thoughts would replay over and over again. The feeling of betrayal, the sense of loss, the overwhelming urge to get out of the toxic environment he had been living in. He knew that the day of reckoning was coming. He could feel it in his bones. But the question was, when would it come? When would he be ready? Lying there in the dark, his back aching from the uncomfortable couch, Ethan realized just how much he had changed. He had gone from a man who trusted his wife with everything, to a man who couldn't even trust her with his most basic dignity. But now he was on the verge of taking back control. He couldn't keep living like this. He had to leave, and he would do it on his own terms. The day Ethan had both feared and longed for finally came. He had spent the past few weeks making preparations with quiet precision, and now, standing in his newly furnished apartment, he felt both a sense of relief and the weight of an old life slipping away. The bare walls of his new space felt colder than he anticipated, yet there was a strange comfort in knowing that this was his. This place, with its simple, humble charm, would be the beginning of his new life. His first step away from the chaos and hurt he'd endured for so long. Ethan had already moved the majority of his belongings into this apartment, leaving only the few things he knew he could part with. The rest had already been carefully stored away in a rented unit, where they would remain until the time was right to fully sever ties with the life he had shared with Jessica. He had also finalized the divorce papers with his lawyer, papers that had been the culmination of so many sleepless nights, so much emotional turmoil. He wasn't going to wait any longer. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. When Jessica left for a work trip, Ethan knew that it was the perfect opportunity to execute the final phase of his plan. It was the moment he had been preparing for, the point of no return. He moved out completely, taking only the bare essentials. His clothes, his laptop, a few personal items that held any significance. Everything else was left behind. His past, the memories, and the heavy weight of everything they had shared. On the kitchen counter, he left a note. It was short, direct, and emotionless, just like the way he felt about this final act of closure. I'm filing for divorce. Please direct all future communications through my lawyer. He couldn't muster the energy for anything more. There was no point in justifying his actions anymore. He was done explaining himself, done hoping things would get better, done living in the shadow of betrayal. The decision had been made. The real confrontation came a few days later. Ethan had been lying low, trying to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in his life, but his phone buzzed with a call that would shatter any sense of calm he had left. It was Jessica, her voice frantic and pleading on the other end of the line. "Ethan, where are you? We need to talk. Please, just let me explain." He didn't answer. He knew what was coming. The emptiness in his chest was now matched by a dull ache in his stomach. He had expected this moment to come, but he wasn't prepared for the rawness of it. After everything, after the mocking, the betrayal, the lies, there she was, asking him for another chance to explain herself. But there was nothing left to explain. Ethan ignored her calls and text messages. The truth was already written, and the words on that note were all he had left to say. But as the days wore on, Jessica's desperation only grew. It wasn't until the third evening after he moved out that she showed up at his apartment. He heard the banging on his door, a frantic, urgent sound that echoed through the hallway. "Let me in. We need to talk." Her voice was shaky, filled with a mix of panic and anger. Ethan walked quietly to the door and peered through the peephole. His heart skipped a beat. There she was, mascara streaked down her face, her eyes wide and desperate. She was no longer the poised, composed woman he had once known. In that moment, all he saw was a woman broken by her own choices, a woman clinging to whatever she could salvage from the wreckage of their relationship. For a brief moment, Ethan felt something stir inside him, an instinctual urge to comfort her, to let her in and try to make everything okay. That old part of him, the part that loved her, tried to rise up from the depths of his bruised heart. But then, just as quickly, he was reminded of everything. The laughter, the mockery, the betrayal, the videos, the texts, the way she had belittled him in front of her family. He remembered it all. Ethan stood there, his hand hovering over the doorknob, torn between what his heart wanted to do and what his mind knew he had to do. Every fiber of his being told him to open the door, to hear her out, to give her one last chance to explain. But deep down, Ethan knew that there were no more words to be spoken. The damage had been done. Her actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. He had seen the truth, and that truth was this. She had never cared for him in the way he had cared for her. She had never truly loved him, not the way he loved her. She had played a game, and now it was time for him to leave it behind. Finally, he opened the window, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the noise of Jessica's frantic pleas. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the weight of the past few months, of the manipulation, of the emotional abuse, lift off his shoulders. He wasn't going to let her control this moment any longer. "I'm done," Ethan said, his voice firm. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. "You've made it clear that I don't matter to you. You didn't care about me, just about your own image. And now, I'm moving on." Jessica's face twisted with rage, but she didn't back down. She tried to argue, to convince him that things could still be salvaged, that they could work through this. But Ethan stood his ground. He didn't flinch. He didn't stutter. The man she had belittled, the man she had mocked, was no longer standing in front of her. The man she had wounded so many times was now standing in the truth of who he was, strong, resolute, and in control of his own destiny. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of calm, a sense of control. The anger and hurt that had built up over the years were gone, replaced by a quiet clarity. There was no more room for doubt. There was no more room for fear. This was his life now. It wasn't about Jessica anymore. It was about him and the future he was going to build, free from her toxic grip. As Jessica's desperate cries faded into the distance, Ethan closed the window, shutting out the woman who had once been his wife. He felt a deep breath of relief. The air felt lighter in the apartment, almost as if the very space itself had been waiting for him to release the burden. For the first time in years, Ethan felt at peace. So, what do you think? How did Ethan's journey resonate with you? We all go through moments in life where we're forced to make tough decisions, sometimes letting go of what we thought we knew was right for us. But remember, every ending is just the beginning of a new chapter. If you've been touched by Ethan's story or if it made you think, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, share your reflections, or let me know if you've been through something similar. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next chapter in this story. Thanks for sticking with me through the ups and downs of Ethan's journey. Your support means the world. See you next time.